All right. So today we're talking to someone who has spent decades inside law and politics and who has watched this entire debate evolve in real time. Tom Houghton, self employed attorney, former township supervisor in Pennsylvania, former state representative, and former congressional candidate, joins us today to discuss how America got here, why common sense gun laws are constitutional, and why political extremism and MAGA culture have made meaningful reform nearly impossible. Tom, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Vexxa. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. So I'd like to hear first off about one of the biggest lies that politicians like to tell Americans when it comes to the Second Amendment.
Well, I mean, first of all, the phrase well regulated, that language is inside the Second Amendment. And I think many of us, or most of us, remember who Justice Antonin Scalia was. He was a very conservative, very ultra right wing SCOTUS, Supreme Court Justice. And in 2008, in the Heller decision, he made it clear that any reasonable regulation or restrictions on guns was not violative of the Second Amendment. So, any common sense, reasonable changes to our current gun scheme, our laws, which I think are wholly insignificant. Any changes, any reasonable regulations do not violate the Second Amendment. I mean, there are so many areas where we desperately need change. But before I even touch on that, any parent knows the experience of dropping your child off at school and then having a conversation as to the escape route. If someone shows up at the school with bad intentions, if unfortunately some 18 to 25-year-old young male shows up with the weapon of choice, an AR-15, what route do you take to get out of the school? And when you're a parent faced with the fear of your child going to a theater, going to a playground, and getting shot, uh, are we really free? And my argument has always been that uh, we always hear from the right that we need the Second Amendment to be unregulated. We need our gun rights to be unrestricted because of freedom. Because of freedom. Well, many people don't feel free. When you see images of Paul McCartney walking across the street in London and sitting on a bus because he feels safe versus his late brother, John Lennon, who died in December of 1980. And I remember as a little kid being traumatized by that incident as I watched Monday Night Football live, as we heard the news. He knows he can't do that in America. So really, are we really free when Paul McCartney can stroll with a cup of coffee on the streets of London and feel safe, but he needs, seven guards around him? No, we're not free. And I've dedicated my life to this issue. It's really next to the climate crisis, along with the climate crisis, gun safety, common sense changes to our current gun scheme are crucial. Are crucial to our freedom, are crucial to our safety as Americans, as citizens. We lose upwards of 45 to 50,000 people a year here in our 50 states. And so I think it's crucial that we get some common sense gun laws passed at the federal level.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to point out, we hear this constantly from conservatives. Well, look at Chicago. Gun laws don't work. And honestly, it's become almost a scripted talking point.
Well, yeah, they use that argument. It's absurd. When there's been plenty of studies done that show that upwards of 65, 75, 80% of the crimes, when they confiscate the guns, they find out they were smuggled in from the surrounding red states where guns, unfortunately, are given out rather easily. And then they're smuggled in and they're used in crimes in our urban areas where, unfortunately, there's a high level of crimes. When you have more people, it's just human nature. There's going to be a higher level of crimes. And so it's a bad argument to say that, gun laws don't work. Look at our cities. Look at Chicago. And it's really frustrating. It's like passing a law saying that I don't want any birds to land in that tree. Well, the birds are going to land in that tree. You can't keep that from happening. And so that's just another one of those arguments you hear from the right to prevent reasonable regulations from being passed in Congress.
Yeah, exactly. It's not meant to eliminate all crime. We are realistic to that.
Yeah, you always hear that, Bex. You always hear, well, we can't have the law, we can't have that kind of law, we can't have red flag law, we can't have comprehensive background checks. Because that guy that just had that mass shooting on TV last night, he would have gotten a gun under that scenario,
Yeah,
or the criminals will get guns. Well, my response has always been no laws are designed to stop bad behavior, they're designed to curb bad behavior. I mean, I know that 55-mile-per-hour speed lines keep me at 60, 62. If there were no speed limit signs, maybe I'd be doing 75 or 80, as many people would. So speed limits curb behavior. They reduce bad behavior. They reduce speeding. They make the roadways safer. And so wouldn't it be a huge success if we only suffered, as tragic as that would be, if we only suffered 25,000 gun deaths per year versus 45, 50,000? I mean, that would be, to me, a huge improvement and a huge success. And it would mean tens of thousands of less devastated family members and friends in a community if we were able to pass common sense, reasonable gun regulations. And one specifically that I think should be a no brainer. Why should an 18-year-old angry young male not be able to buy a handgun, but he can walk into a store in every state in the union except for Hawaii, California, and Illinois and purchase an AK-47 or an AR-15? That makes no sense. We can't get agreement in Congress to raise that to 21 as well. I mean, I happen to believe that weapons of war should not be handed out to citizens, but at least can't we improve that law and allow that to match the handgun law at 21 years old? That's a
yeah,
federal law. You cannot buy a handgun until you're 21.
yeah. The Highland Park shooter is the perfect example.
July 4th, 2022 in Chicago, correct. And his dad, knowing that he made suicidal threats and made threats to others, allowed him to purchase an AR-15. Um, he was living in his house and he could have stopped it. And he went ahead and murdered 7 people and injured maybe 4 or 5 dozen people, including an 8-year-old, up to an 88-year-old in that Fourth of July tragic incident. And so, common sense gun regulation, starting with that one, that should be a no brainer. I don't understand how we can't reach common ground in Congress to raise the age to 21 for the purchase of semi-automatic long guns. It makes absolutely zero sense, and it's maddening.
And to pull in, I guess what they refer to as the MAGA crowd, their biggest thing is for 10 years now is protect the children, protect the children. And I feel like, wouldn't this be a common sense thing to do when you have all these mass shootings and you have, children not only being killed in schools, shot to pieces where they couldn't even be recognized.
This is not the freedom that we want. It's not the freedom I want. It's not the freedom any of our families want. And it's just really frustrating that we get that pushback. Everything becomes absolute. Well, criminals will still get guns, or uh, we should have open carry or we should have more guns. We shouldn't have laws where we have to lock them up. These are all common sense things we can do to keep the guns out of the hands of people that should not have guns. And then, in terms of mental illness, they just say, well, we just have to deal with that. But then they refuse to fund mental health programs, and they cut Medicaid by $1 trillion as they're giving tax breaks to the upper 3% and multinational corporations. So the hypocrisy is just it's really frustrating. It was frustrating as a state representative here in Southeast Pennsylvania, and it's been frustrating as a parent for these last 25, 26 years as I've been a parent, to know that we have so much gun violence. The gun culture is just out of control.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the political, and I think, and maybe I'm wrong, and I keep going back to the last 10 years, but I feel like, the political rhetoric alone has tied into, and I'm not going to say that that caused, gun violence to increase, but when you have politicians being shot in their home, for instance. I just feel like the rhetoric, is turning this political culture. It's taken it well beyond what it ever was.
Well, the state representative and her husband and her dog were
Yeah.
assassinated at the home, and then uh, the gun-toting mad individual then went to a state senator and shot him and his wife.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they survived, but um, you know, political violence is out of control. We know that we're severely divided, and it's absurd to flood our country with 400 million guns, especially in that situation. I always like to use hypotheticals when making an argument. When I talk to gentlemen, just let's just deal with the AR-15, AK-47, semi-automatic long guns, raising that age, from 18 to 21. The brain of an 18-year-old boy, young man, is not as developed as a 21-year-old's. Now, of course, maybe really should be 25 because the brain has an opportunity
Yeah.
to spend another 4 years developing. But I always say to people that don't believe, well, if he's 18, he can go into the army. He can, he should be able to buy an AR-15. Well, if he wants to join the army. And then I always give a hypothetical by saying, if you worked at a gun store and your 18-year-old high school senior daughter came home and said, Dad, I know you haven't met Joe yet, but he said something really ugly to me and I broke up with him. And I did it in front of the entire cafeteria. I didn't mean to. I meant to pull him aside. He was red faced and humiliated and he ran out of the room. And so you have a picture of Joey as a father. You never met him, but you have a photo. You know what he looks like. And that night you're at the gun store and Joe shows up and he wants to buy an AR-15 and he wants to buy some magazines of the bullets that go into that AR-15. Are you going to sell him that weapon? Number one, and number two, are you going to allow your daughter to go to school the next day or the next year, or are you going to move to Alaska to get out of the neighborhood? And I can't find anyone I'm in an argument with about gun laws, common sense changes that we need. I can't find anyone that would say yes, I would sell him the gun, and I would let my daughter go to school the next day.
Absolutely. I agree. And just the rhetoric, I think alone, I mean, I think mass shootings, yes, there may be some mental health issues included with the access, but I think a whole culture of, Kyle Rittenhouses have been unleashed on especially young men in this. I mean, let's be honest, primarily young men in this country. And just for example, some of the things that have been said by public officials, calling other officials, that it's a civil war against them.
Yeah, it's irresponsible, and it's reckless for politicians, for elected officials to use dangerous rhetoric. Everyone's got to ratchet it down.
Yeah,
And it turns out, and one of the arguments you always hear is, well, most of those 45,000 deaths are suicide, and the right or the ultra right, when they're arguing against any common sense gun regulations that we need, they argue, well, there are suicides, and they discount those folks that go through that experience and the families that suffer. They discount that as that's irrelevant to the numbers. Well, there was a Harvard study that specifically talked about the odds of being successful in a suicide attempt in the presence of a gun, if there's a gun present in the household. And they cited to this one study where there was this young teenage girl, had no mental health issues, from all accounts, got along fine with her family, was a good kid, straight A student, and she had a sleepover. And Snapchat, my kids used to use the Snapchat. I guess it's something where you can take a picture and it send it and disappears in a few seconds.
yeah,
One of her friends went into the bathroom and put the phone up over the shower curtain, snapped a photo of her showering, and then Snapchatted it to a bunch of people. And she came out of the shower and realized they did that. And she was horrified. And what did she do? Instead of being able to have a cooling off period, or being spoken to by her friends, let's calm her down, she ran into the dining room, grabbed her mom's purse where she knew there was a loaded handgun, grabbed the handgun and shot herself in the head and died. And so you can't tell me that she would have ran into the bathroom and got her mom's pills if her mom had some prescription pills, and taken a whole bottle. And if she did, that the odds of saving her are still pretty high.
yeah.
But with the gun, it's the rate of success of pulling the trigger when you're committing suicide with a gun is very high. And it's as humans, we all have the impulse. You know, when you go to see the Grand Canyon, even if you're not suicidal, you wonder, I wonder what it could be like to jump off the side of the cliff here and fly. It's just a weird human impulse that sometimes creeps into our brains. And if you have a bad night, if you're a gambler and you lose all your money, or if you have a recent loss with a family member or a loved one, and you're really depressed, and the gun is present, you are way more likely to commit suicide, or at least attempt to commit suicide. If you attempt it with a gun, you're most likely going to be successful, as we know.
And that's why safe storage laws matter. How do you feel about I see recently that they are now holding parents responsible for, whereas before I think they just kind of made excuses. Now they're, legally going after them. How do you feel about parents being prosecuted?
I think if there's negligence, or at least gross negligence, I think it's common sense that the young man we spoke about earlier in Illinois at the Fourth of July parade in 2022, his like I said, his dad had knowledge. He knew. And he ended up going to trial and had to serve 60 days in prison and a couple years probation. That's better than nothing. But at least that kind of message sends a warning to parents that we have to be more cautious. We have to be smarter. If your most likely son, unfortunately, we know testosterone in these young men, and they're the ones we're mostly concerned about. If your son has issues, and if he does, if has outbursts. I have a psych degree along with a law degree, so I'm familiar with these issues. If your son has clear mental health concerns, and if you're worried about your son doing something irrational and dangerous, or if he's mad at a girlfriend, or if he is not socially appropriate with friends and around adults and authority figures, you should not buy that kid an AR-15. I mean, it should be common sense.
Yeah.
The one case with the young kid, I'm trying to remember the state. His parents were called into school that day. They knew he was doing drawings of people having their shooting themselves with
Yeah.
bloody figures. He had the gun in his backpack, and no one knew it. The parents knew that they had a gun at home, and he went into class that day and shot his teacher and a couple other kids. I'm
Yeah.
just drawing a blank on the state. So, and then the other parents took off. That was all over the news a couple years ago, and they were hiding out for a couple weeks,
Yep.
and they were
Mhm.
charged and convicted. So, I think it's a good message.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree.
Parents need to be more responsible and smart
Yeah.
and use common sense.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. Honestly, a lot of Americans are emotionally exhausted. We're tired of funerals. We're tired of lockdown drills. Tired of seeing grieving parents on television, and tired of politicians doing absolutely nothing while accepting money from gun lobbyists. So we really appreciate you joining us today, and you're great. I love this. I love people speaking out about these kind of topics. We need more people to do this. So, I commend you, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Vex. My pleasure. Anytime.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.